Welcome to our service literature reading. This is the Hospitals and Institutions Manual from NA World Service. I will be breaking this reading down as the table of contents is laid out in our manual. This section is General Information, starting with Introduction. This handbook was developed by the World Service Conference H&I Committee based on extensive input from hospitals and institutions subcommittees. Throughout the fellowship, every attempt was made to tap the wealth of H&I experience that exists in our fellowship and use it here to provide the most up-to-date policies, concepts, and procedures for providing H&I services. The information in this handbook was developed over a long period of time, and only through trial and error have we found what works best. A lot of the material and suggestions will work well in most hospitals and institution settings. However, individual countries will need to follow the laws and regulations that govern them. Utilization of zonal, national, or networking forums provide invaluable resources as they are sharing and support-oriented. They are geographically and culturally more compatible to solutions in that area of the world. The language used in this handbook was carefully considered. Our hope is that by not using colloquial and slang terms, this work can be more easily translated into languages other than English. Be it resolved, as Narcotics Anonymous is a worldwide fellowship whose primary purpose transcends national boundaries, cultural barriers, and linguistic differences. 1. For both the general purposes of NA World Services and the specific purposes of the World Service Conference of Narcotics Anonymous, there are neither foreign languages nor foreign countries. 2. That the World Service Committee has elected to use English as the working language of its plenary and committee meetings, records, and primary reports. Note appearing at the page bottom indicates the issue was resolved in the 1992 World Service Committee. Why is a hospitals and institutions meeting or presentation needed? The purpose of a hospitals and institutions meeting is to carry the NA message of recovery to addicts who do not have full access to regular Narcotics Anonymous meetings. Hospitals and institutions meetings and/or presentations, except for those in longer-term facilities, are intended to simply introduce those attending to some of the basics of the NA program. What constitutes a hospitals and institutions meeting and/or presentation? 1. In order to form a clear understanding of a hospitals and institutions meeting presentation, it is important to know where it fits in our service structure. Rather than being an NA group, which may be represented at the Area Service Committee by a group service representative, a hospitals and institutions meeting or presentation is a service provided by that Area Service Committee through its hospitals and institutions subcommittee. See the temporary working guide to our service structure for more information on the differences between the group and area levels of NA service. 2. A hospitals and institutions meeting presentation is always held under the auspices of an hospitals and institutions subcommittee. Any meeting not linked into the service structure in this way is not a hospitals and institutions meeting. Where there is no existing hospitals and institutions subcommittee, groups conducting hospitals and institutions service can be accountable by following the WSC and hospitals and institutions guidelines and reporting to an area service committee or regional service committee. 3. Hospitals and institutions meetings and/or presentations are held in facilities where addicts do not have full access to regular Narcotics Anonymous meetings. 4. Meetings which are held in a facility but which are fully self-supporting and free of restrictions are not hospitals and institutions meetings. 5. All hospitals and institutions meetings and/or presentations are closed to outside participation. NA members from the outside should attend the hospitals and institutions meeting only when invited by the panel leader. The only people to attend hospitals and institutions meetings are the panel leader, panel chair, panel member, and speaker, or anyone approved by the hospitals and institutions subcommittee to go into that hospitals and institutions meeting. If there is any confusion over whether or not a meeting should be in hospitals and institutions meeting and/or presentation or a regular meeting, please contact your hospitals and institutions subcommittee for assistance. Where and how to start a hospitals and institutions meeting or presentation. The initial approach to start a hospitals and institutions meeting and/or presentation should be made through an hospitals and institutions subcommittee. Don't ever act alone. Often a facility will approach Narcotics Anonymous and ask to have an hospitals and institutions meeting. At other times, an hospitals and institutions subcommittee will approach the facility to propose a meeting or presentation. In either case, the hospitals and institutions subcommittee should work in conjunction with the public information subcommittee. Hospitals and institutions and public information cooperation rules of thumb for cooperation between hospitals and institutions and public information. 1. Remember, we all belong to the same fellowship, and our primary purpose is the same no matter to which subcommittee we belong. 2. Communication between the two subcommittees ahead of time, that means planning together on how to proceed, will help avoid problems and promote unity. 3. Flexibility will allow for cooperation that responds to the needs of the facility while upholding our traditions. 3. I can't, but we can applies to subcommittee members and subcommittees. 4. Work together. When we don't, we divert ourselves from our primary purpose. There may be instances where the most effective and productive presentation can only be accomplished by a combined effort of representatives from hospitals and institutions and public information. This, of course, is a perfect application of our 12 steps and 12 traditions working together to carry the message of NA recovery to the still suffering addict. Examples: a hospital treatment center calls for a presentation to their doctors and nurses. Public information: a hospital treatment center calls for a presentation to their clients. Or hospitals and institutions, a call comes requesting information, maybe a meeting, doesn't know. Hospitals and institutions and public information if a public information subcommittee doesn't exist in an area or region. Hospitals and institutions subcommittees may take on many of the responsibilities generally taken on by public information subcommittees. Ask your area service committee or regional service committee for support and information. Generally, a public information activity is geared to people outside our fellowship and includes people who come in contact with addicts and can help addicts to find NA. The approach with non-addicts differs from the more personal sharing appropriate to talks given to addicts. At the world, regional, and area levels, public information committees and subcommittees are working to develop materials to use in presentations to people in the helping professions. Cooperation and flexibility are the keys that will allow hospitals and institution subcommittees and public information subcommittees at all levels to keep informed on what is being done by other subcommittees in their area or region. If we work together, we can accomplish any task. Unity of purpose is vital to our efforts. Note: the above text is taken from a Guide to Public Information, revised April of 1988. The purpose of a hospitals and institutions subcommittee is to carry the NA message of recovery to addicts who do not have full access to regular Narcotics Anonymous meetings. Hospitals and institutions panels, except for those in longer-term facilities, are intended to simply introduce those attending to some of the basics of the NA program. When local members of groups see the need for a hospitals and institutions presentation at a facility, the local hospitals and institutions subcommittee should be contacted. Hospitals and institutions panels are a function of the hospitals and institutions subcommittee. Individuals should not take it upon themselves to do hospitals and institutions work, and groups should only do it in places where an area hospitals and institutions subcommittee has not been formed, with guidance from their regional hospitals and institutions subcommittee. At these presentations, outside participation should be limited to the panel members who are invited in advance. If your subcommittee plans to send out letters to facilities introducing them to NA and offering to hold a hospitals and institutions meeting presentation in their facility, it is advisable to have letterhead stationery printed. All your letters should be on that stationery and should be typewritten formal letters with examples of NA literature enclosed. Keep copies on file of all letters you send. Examples of form letters can be found in Appendix A of this manual. Before you approach the facility, suggest holding a hospitals and institutions meeting presentation there. The first step is to find out in advance who is the appropriate administrative person to contact. Your initial calls or letters of inquiry should be addressed to that person. If that initial contact is by mail, it should be followed up shortly with a phone call. If the facility is interested in a hospitals and institutions meeting or presentation, you should schedule an initial interview to make the arrangements. Before the first hospitals and institutions meeting or presentation is held in the facility, thorough discussions should take place between the representatives of Narcotics Anonymous and the representatives of the facility. The final agreements about proper procedures and expectations should be put in writing. See Appendix B, page 111 in this manual for a sample form to use during the initial interview. The completed form will serve as a written agreement between your subcommittee and the facility. Remember when you show up for that initial interview that you are seen as a representative of Narcotics Anonymous. The fellowship as a whole may be judged by how you conduct yourself, so common courtesy is essential. For example, show up on time for the appointment. Be neat in your appearance and be courteous. Be prepared to make your presentation. Bring Narcotics Anonymous literature. Think through in advance what points you need to cover. Have your checklist in front of you so your presentation is clear. When your material is covered and your contact person wants to finish the interview, do so promptly and politely. The use of Narcotics Anonymous conference-approved literature is an important part of a hospitals and institutions meeting's effort to carry the message. These initial discussions provide a good setting to determine the proper methods for distributing literature inside the facility. Many facilities will agree to buy Narcotics Anonymous literature on their own. We encourage that. If the facility is unable to do so, The local hospitals and institutions subcommittee may be able to assist. For information on the budgeting necessary for this, see page 9 of this manual. Once these steps have been taken, and the hospitals and institutions meeting presentation is being held regularly in the facility, it is important to keep channels of communication open. Anyone involved in hospitals and institutions should be familiar with and respect the facility's policies that affect us. We should also be familiar with our own policies as outlined throughout this handbook. Orientation sessions for new hospitals and institutions workers should be used to accomplish this. A hospitals and institutions meeting provides the first exposure to Recovery and Narcotics Anonymous for many addicts. So it is imperative that we carry a clear and consistent message of Narcotics Anonymous recovery and project a positive image of our fellowship. This also applies to how we handle the facility administration. In order to keep any difficulties to a minimum, take care to maintain consistent contact between the facility and the subcommittee. Who is best suited to carry the Narcotics Anonymous message in a hospitals and institutions meeting? In our experience, it is best for members to have 3 months clean before attending a hospitals and institutions meeting and 6 months clean before speaking at one. It is not important whether or not we have been in a similar facility ourselves. Anyone with a clear and consistent Narcotics Anonymous message who is willing to share is well suited for hospitals and institutions work. Things to consider. Adolescents. When adolescents are referred to in this handbook, we are referring to anyone under the legal age of majority in your state or country. We need to remember that adolescents are prospective members and should be treated with respect. When sharing in a hospitals and institutions meeting presentation, we need to remember that to an adolescent, the stress experienced due to peer pressure or the relationship with their parents and/or teacher may be just as much a crisis to them as losing a job, marriage, or house may be to others. In NA, we learn to deal with our feelings and emotions and share with others how we've been able to work through them by utilizing the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous. Due to the governmental statutes regarding adolescents, we need to be especially aware of facilities' rules and regulations as they relate to our interaction with these prospective members. For example, some facilities may require a staff member to be present during meetings. One suggestion we may make to administrators of facilities for adolescents is that they make attendance at the hospitals and institutions, meeting voluntary. We have found this reduces distraction, increasing the opportunity for recovery in the Narcotics Anonymous Fellowship. While some people maintain that adolescents respond better to people closer to their own age, the bulk of our experience suggests that the age of the person sharing at an adolescent hospitals and institutions meeting is secondary to their ability to share a strong, clear message of recovery. Adolescents seem to respond more to the message than to the messenger. All hospitals and institutions meetings presentations are highly structured and should be geared towards recovery through the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous. Our experience has shown that we do not need to use a special format when carrying the message to adolescents. In addition to the do's and don'ts found on pages 28 and 40 to 41, we feel that the following should be included. First, the do's: do remember that this is a we program. No addict should feel that she is being preached to. Do remember that an addict is an addict, regardless of age. Do tell them that there is fun in recovery, i.e. social events, fellowship, etc. Do acknowledge and validate their feelings and emotions. Do acknowledge and validate their clean time. Now for the don'ts. Don't glorify your past. Don't say, I feel like I'm talking to my kids. Don't compare your bottom to theirs. Don't patronize adolescents. Don't use profanity. Additional needs for addicts in hospitals and institutions. We in this fellowship have become keenly aware of a large portion of the population who are unable, because of a disability, to receive the message that was so freely given to us. In the following section, we suggest ways to better carry the message to those addicts with such additional needs who are served by hospitals and institutions. We write this in the spirit of our 5th tradition, dedicated to the proposition that no addict anywhere need die without a chance to know a better way of life. General preparation. 1. Find out what materials are available through the World Service Office to assist addicts with additional needs. Update your current stockpile of Narcotics Anonymous materials to include the items for addicts with additional needs. Investigate the availability of community resources for addicts with additional needs and look into services such as sign language interpreters. 3. Every effort should be made to contact the State Drug and Alcohol Commission, Department of Corrections, treatment centers, etc., to inform them of additional needs and of Narcotics Anonymous materials that are available. 4. Some hospitals and institutions, subcommittees, and areas may have members with additional needs. Your subcommittee should make efforts to allow them to participate in hospitals and institutions' service work. The Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee may provide Braille literature, large print white booklets, and tapes in addition to other services outlined in this handbook. While the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee may pay for the literature and other items purchased from our World Service Office, the facility is responsible to provide for other additional needs. Hearing impaired. 1. Speak directly full face, speak slowly and distinctly. 2. A sign language interpreter should be used whenever possible during a panel discussion meeting at the expense of the facility. The sign interpreter must have clear eye contact between the speaker and the hearing impaired. 3. When lip reading is necessary. Hearing impaired addicts will need to sit close to the speaker and not have their view obstructed by such obstacles as people, poles, etc. 4. Keep pencil and pad handy during all meetings with hearing impaired persons. This is a simple and easy way to ensure that hearing and non-hearing addicts can communicate with each other. It is important to remember that dramatic facial expressions while speaking are very helpful to members who read lips. Visually impaired. A wide range of resource materials for the blind are available through the World Service Office, such as tapes and publications in Braille. 1. Do not touch blind addicts without their permission. They cannot see you coming, and it can be a frightening experience for them. 2. Before helping a blind person, be sure to ask if they need help. 3. Only about 10% of the blind read Braille. 5. As a preparation for helping blind addicts, it might be helpful to sit through a meeting with your eyes closed to get a feel for their experience. Physically challenged, inform appropriate staff and facilities of the accessibility of Narcotics Anonymous to physically challenged addicts. 2. When carrying the message to the physically challenged, we need to consider accessibility, i.e., bathrooms, ramps, and other necessities. Most city codes list buildings with access for the physically challenged. Bathrooms, ramps, and other necessities are considerations when planning hospitals and institutions meetings, working with others, men with men, women with women. Some facilities house only men or only women. Other facilities house both men and women, but keep them separate. In these facilities, where your meetings will consist of only men or only women, we feel strongly that only same-sex Narcotics Anonymous members should participate. Remember, our primary purpose is to carry the message of recovery, not to make our meetings more popular with the addicts we are trying to help. Problems that arise in this area have the potential to seriously damage the credibility of Narcotics Anonymous. Experience has taught us that we can avoid these problems if we follow this simple guideline. Services other than meetings. Often hospitals and institutions subcommittees are requested to provide services other than hospitals and institutions meetings presentations. In responding to such requests, it is essential that we are clear about what kinds of services are appropriate for a hospitals and institutions subcommittee to provide. Treatment facilities and correctional institutions cannot be expected to completely understand the scope and function of an hospitals and institutions subcommittee. They may make requests which we are either unable or unwilling to meet. It is the responsibility of the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee to establish limits to their services based on the 12 traditions, the hospitals and institutions structure, and current resources. Many of the services requested will call for cooperation and coordination between the hospitals and institutions and public information subcommittees. Since much of this work could reasonably fall into the domain of either subcommittee, we do provide literature when the facilities themselves are unable to provide approved literature to their residents. Hospitals and institutions subcommittees should do so. This is especially important in facilities where there is not a regular hospitals and institutions meeting presentation. If there is a request for NA literature, then this request should be forwarded to the Area Service Committee for action. Tapes, only tapes that have been approved for sale by the World Service Office, should be used at hospitals and institutions meetings presentations. The most current WSO order form lists tapes that have passed through the review and approval process. Serial publications reaching out in the NA way may be taken into facilities for the residents' use, but since they are not conference approved, they should not be used during meetings and/or presentations. Coordinator. Coordinators of meetings and facilities should be connected to a hospitals and institutions service subcommittee where there is no panel system in place. No individual NA member should agree to sponsor an hospitals and institutions meeting on his/her own. A meeting that is held in a facility where there is no connection with a hospitals and institutions service body is not an hospitals and institutions meeting presentation. Facilities often use the term sponsor for a member of NA who is considered the outside contact. We have used the term coordinator to prevent any possible confusion with personal sponsorship. We do not provide transportation. Hospitals and institutions subcommittees do not provide transportation for residents to outside NA meetings. Providing rides could create a liability for the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee and the Fellowship, i.e. accidents, escapes, and false accusations. For pen pal or jail mail, this is not a function of a Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee, Budgeting and literature distribution. A budget needs to be prepared and submitted to the Area Service Committee. Budgets may be prepared yearly, quarterly, or monthly according to your local needs. The hospitals and institutions chair's report to the Area Service Committee should include a monthly statement detailing literature and administrative expenses. When the time comes to prepare your hospitals and institutions budget, it is important to get input from members who are familiar with the needs of your subcommittee, i.e. the past hospitals and institutions chairperson, and the area or regional treasurer. It is important to take an inventory of your past budget to assist in projecting your upcoming expenses. This will help determine what you will need for a budget. The hospitals and institutions subcommittee should receive literature from the area rather than funds for literature. Administrative expenses may be advanced to the subcommittee for budgeted items, with receipts presented later, or the hospitals and institutions subcommittee may present receipts and be reimbursed for budgeted expenses. Budgets are not perfect, and occasional expenses beyond the budgeted amount may be necessary. Such expenses should be approved by the Area Service Committee. New areas should proceed very slowly in preparing a budget for the amounts of literature needed to effectively carry the message. Small monthly allotments in literature may well suffice. As the Area Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee expands to the point where more hospitals and institutions meetings consistently have active panels and more literature is needed, then the area can vote to accept a budget increase. It seems more prudent to go slowly and continue to fill whatever literature needs there are, rather than to have an abundance of literature left over from unsound planning practices. Some basic aspects that you may wish to consider when preparing a budget are: 1. Literature. See literature disbursement and tracking forms in Appendix B, pages 127 and 128. You should be able to evaluate your monthly literature needs based on past experience. It is advisable to project a little above the monthly average to cover any unusual circumstances. 2. Reevaluate the disbursement of literature to facilities which allow their clients to go to outside meetings. Also, we need to streamline the types of literature that we take into facilities. Make basic texts available to be placed in libraries of correctional institutions, one for every 50 residents if possible. Hospitals, treatment centers, and institutions should be urged to use their budgets and funds to purchase NA literature for use by their residents. Administrative costs might include copies of minutes, guidelines or policies, reports on projects from other levels of service, or other committees, postage and rent for hospitals and institutions subcommittee meetings if needed. You will, of course, find expenses not included on this list, and you may also see some here that don't apply to your hospitals and institutions subcommittee. Remember, sound planning and common sense are the best guides when planning your budget. After it has been approved by your hospitals and institutions subcommittee, the budget must be presented to the ASC or RSC for adoption. We should be cooperative in order to allow other subcommittees to have workable budgets also. Remember our unity of purpose. We are not in competition with other subcommittees, but rather each subcommittee has its own way of reaching the same goal of making recovery more available to the addict who still suffers. The forms located in Appendix B may be used to keep track of the literature taken into all hospitals and institutions commitments to avoid oversupplying literature to any facility and to effectively plan a budget. The information pamphlets noted on the forms are those suggested by the WSC Hospitals and Institutions Committee as being especially well suited for use in hospitals and institutions meetings. Questions and answers about hospitals and institutions. The WSC Hospitals and Institutions Committee receives many questions about hospitals and institutions work from individuals, areas, and regions. In this question and answer format, we will present the committee's responses to some of the more commonly asked questions. Question. Some facilities want their residents to be allowed to continue to attend the hospitals and institutions meeting at the facility after they are released. How does the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee deal with this when those newly released residents do not meet our requirements for our outside members to come in? Answer. In most cases, this is not a problem. The Hospitals and Institutions panel carries the message to addicts who are residents clients of that facility. Like any member of the fellowship, these members should not be asked to participate on the Hospitals and Institutions panel until they are able to meet the requirements established by the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee. If a member of the fellowship goes on a panel to the facility from which they were released, it is a good idea to make it clear to that member that our role is to carry a Narcotics Anonymous message of recovery, not to make comments about the facility or its program. Question. In our area, we have requests from a number of facilities to come in regularly. We can't keep up with all the requests. How should a subcommittee decide which facilities to bring the message into first? Answer. One important factor is the degree to which the residents are restricted from outside meetings. Addicts who have full access to regular NA meetings usually do not require hospitals and institutions services. If they are completely restricted from outside meeting attendance, they should be high on the priority list. Another factor is the length of time that a facility has been waiting for your subcommittee to bring in a hospitals and institutions meeting presentation. After considering these and other factors, the decision is up to each hospitals and institutions subcommittee. A subcommittee should not make a commitment to start an hospitals and institutions meeting until it is capable of being responsible to that commitment. Question. We have hospitals and institutions meetings in our area where some or all of the residents are on some type of medication. Are these appropriate facilities in which to carry the Narcotics Anonymous message? If so, can the residents share at meetings before they are clean? Answer. Yes, these are appropriate facilities. As to whether these residents can share, a more comprehensive discussion of this and other related issues is provided on page of this handbook. Question. We have had problems with facilities that require that their residents attend our meetings. How should we deal with this? Answer. In hospitals and institution service work, we carry the Narcotics Anonymous message of recovery into different types of facilities that have different objectives and methods. We do not try to decide which are proper and which are not. We do not, therefore, challenge this practice on principle. If, on the other hand, there is a specific problem that has developed in the meeting presentation because some who attend are consistently disruptive, it may be appropriate to approach the facility about this. When such a disruption happens during a meeting, it can be handled in an understanding yet firm manner, asking for order in the meeting and talking to the individuals after the meeting presentation. In this way, we can usually defuse situations before they escalate. But if it continues to happen regularly, it should be addressed with the staff. Question. Should the hospitals and institutions meetings be listed along with the regular Narcotics Anonymous meetings in our local meeting directory? Answer, no. Participation in hospitals and institutions meetings, presentations is coordinated through the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee. Your local meeting directory may include a statement referring interested members to the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee. Question. We have a situation where individuals take it upon themselves to start hospitals and institutions meetings. The Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee is concerned because in the past, when there were problems and the meetings were canceled, the facilities wouldn't have any more involvement with Narcotics Anonymous at all. Answer. A Narcotics Anonymous meeting held in a facility where there is no direct involvement by the local Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee is not considered an Hospitals and Institutions meeting presentation. Such meetings fall under the responsibility of the Area or Regional Service Committee. This may be a sensitive issue, however, for those involved in the new meeting. Such situations should be handled with care and with respect for those involved. Question. Our Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee was asked to prepare a sponsorship list for a facility so that they could match their residents up with a sponsor prior to release. Also, we have been asked to arrange for rides to meetings. Should we do this or not? Answer. These are services that Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee should not become involved in. Sponsorship is an aspect of personal recovery, and it is up to the individual member to select someone that they feel would be a good sponsor. Question. How should we deal with the situation when a facility requires that a Narcotics Anonymous panel member report any violation of their regulations heard shared in a meeting? Answer. Occasionally, facilities want us to become involved with them in ways which are not consistent with our primary purpose. If a facility makes requests of this nature to us, we have the following options. 1. Work with the administration and staff to achieve an understanding of our principles so that we are not required to make such agreements. 2. If that is not possible, make it clear that we cannot accept such responsibilities and that a staff person must be provided at the meeting presentation to meet the facility's needs. 3. If these issues cannot be resolved, we will not be able to provide a meeting presentation in the facility. Question. What if drugs are passed at hospitals and institutions meetings? Answer. Read in the opening statements that no drugs or paraphernalia be on any person at this meeting. If you don't respect this request, the meeting may be discontinued. If drugs are passed, pack up and leave the meeting or presentation immediately. Let the staff know simply that the meeting is over for today and that we will be back again next week. See question above for dealing with facilities that require reporting this or other activities. Question. A facility has asked us to change the format of our hospitals and institutions meeting presentation. In this particular case, the residents want us to dispense with some of our usual readings in the beginning of the meeting and to read a statement at the end that does not pertain to Narcotics Anonymous. How does hospitals and institutions stand on this issue? Answer. The format of a hospitals and institutions meeting is up to the Hospitals and Institutions Subcommittee, not the facilities or the residents of the facilities. We are bringing in a presentation of Narcotics Anonymous, and it is imperative that we carry a clear message of Narcotics Anonymous. If the facility insists, see options 1 and 3 above. Question: when taking in hospitals and institutions meeting presentation into facilities for minors, do we need different procedures? Answer: just as our behavior in a facility must be respectful of that facility's policies, we must respect all laws and ordinances as well. Such restrictions are beyond the control of Narcotics Anonymous. Be sure you are aware of the rules and regulations of any facility before bringing in hospitals and institutions meeting presentation. It is suggested that when dealing with an adolescent facility, a staff member be present. This is for the protection of the Narcotics Anonymous members. It is not our responsibility to see that the residents follow the rules of the facility. We are there to carry a message of recovery within the framework of our traditions. Question: do staff members need to be present during a hospitals and institutions meeting presentation? Answer: in some cases, we may request that the facility not have staff members present during the hospitals and institutions meeting. In others, we may request that a staff member be provided. Each case is different, but the presence or absence of staff members is ultimately up to the facility. Question: should recovery tokens such as keychains or chips be brought into facilities? Answer: no. The regulations regarding the use of anything brought into a facility at the federal, state, or local levels are often many, varied, and confusing, placing an undue burden on hospitals and institutions subcommittee members. More importantly, the possibility of compromising the residents' anonymity due to a loss of continuous clean time are too great. Question: can a meeting in a correctional facility be sponsored by a member who is incarcerated there? Answer: no. This is never appropriate, whether in a hospital or a jail. Coordinators must be able to attend outside subcommittee meetings. Long-term prisons in which it is not possible for a hospitals and institutions subcommittee to bring in weekly hospitals and institutions meetings may have an outside liaison help them. Remember, only meetings. Presentations where hospitals and institutions members are present are hospitals and institutions meetings. Question: what can we do if a facility's policy is a violation of our traditions? Answer: occasionally problems arise because facilities do not understand our traditions or the nature and function of NA in general. Usually this can be avoided or handled successfully. See sections throughout this handbook on initial contacts, relationship with facilities, and follow-up. Remember, facilities cannot violate traditions. They don't have traditions. The responsibility for upholding our traditions or choosing to participate in situations which compromise them is ours alone. Question: we have a hospitals and institutions meeting in a long-term correctional facility. The inmates who attend want to elect officers, including a GSR. How should we respond? Answer: in a long-term facility, this hospitals and institutions meeting may be the only NA recovery these addicts experience. Because of this, the addicts should have the opportunity to participate in the full recovery experience, and this includes service to fellow addicts. One thing we have to share with these addicts is the difference between a hospitals and institutions meeting and regular meetings, and that they can't have a group service representative or participate in area service. That the meeting they are participating in is a function of an hospitals and institutions subcommittee. The election of officers should be limited to the internal function of the meeting, such as secretary, chairperson, coffee maker, and literature person, someone who keeps track of the literature and lets the panel leader know the need for literature.